So without further ado, let me begin. Brace yourself. It's a big topic. And one other thing also is that previously I created a MR already, mainly for reference purposes. So I will not intend to go through all the nitty-gritty details. If you're keen, the details, especially for those like breaking changes, I don't think it'll be damn boring if I go through this during the sharing. So for this sharing, I mainly want to focus on like how I wanted to start. Why is it that I wanted to start doing the Flutter 2 migration? It's like going down a rabbit hole. And it actually started from PX1436. So the reason why I actually wanted to migrate to Flutter 2 was actually because when I was fixing this bug, normally when we do UI development, I actually like to have something like a storybook. Storybook basically allows you to develop your UI widget. And you see over here, if you load it all using Storybook, you have the person that develops it can actually specify what kinds of options and customizations this particular UI widget is capable of accepting. And if the user actually changes the color and everything, you can see it rendered differently down here. So initially I was hoping that the project would have Storybook available, but no, we didn't. So I tried to install Storybook, and we get a bunch of errors. I would say that in large part, as long as your project has got outdated dependencies, trying to install a new dependency into the project can be a huge pain, and it might not even find a feasible solution trying to resolve all the transitive dependencies, which is what happened to Storybook Flutter. Believe me, I tried installing like 10 different versions of Storybook Flutter, historical versions as well. None of them worked. So the next thing that I looked at was, okay, I think we really have to look at migrating to Flutter 2. Now, there's a lot of reasons for keeping your packages updated. Definitely the security fixes, performance optimizations, whether it's major best practices or being able to resolve dependency versions like I mentioned just now. But I think that the main thing why as a developer you should actually feel like you want to keep updated is because it actually improves the developer experience. With new updated versions, typically there's new features that you can use, and this in general can actually make it easier for you as a developer to create whether UI or how you structure your logic and everything. So the very first step, back then when I was doing this, it was actually still, the latest stable version for Flutter was actually 2.2.2, but yesterday when I checked, you see, actually there's stable version 2.2.3 already. Now, this is a little bit of a deviation. I know some of you actually still prefer downloading the Flutter binary and then in your terminal, whether ZSHRC or something, you actually set a path to it. So depending on what project you're working on, you comment away a particular binary path, you add another one. But if you haven't actually tried out FVM before, Flutter Version Manager, I think this would be a good time to try it out. The installation is as simple as just doing a brew install. You got to add a tab first because this is a third-party repository. Then you have to add the binary that is provided by FVM for your Flutter. So what this does is for FVM, you can actually say what version of Flutter to use as the global Flutter. So, once you set that version to be the global Flutter already via FVM, when you type Flutter keyword, it will actually reference from this path the specific version that you have specified. This is optional, the alias over here. This alias allows you to actually just type F and then frun, fbuild APK or something like that. And the main reason for doing this is if we specify specific Flutter versions in the .fvm folder, then you don't actually have to keep changing the global Flutter version. So once you've installed it, it's optional whether you want to set a global version, and you can check, okay, if you have set a global version to 2.2.2 as above, when you type Flutter version, you should see 2.2.2. If you are navigated into a project and you type F version, you will see the project version specified in the .fvm folder. Now, another one that provides you with a nice GUI also is this thing called Sidekick. So everything that I've mentioned on the left, if you're somebody that prefers a GUI interface, it also allows you to navigate and install packages like that. One thing that I think this provides an advantage over that just using FVM on its own doesn't is over here, you see this, I paused the video. You can actually see the full list of all Flutter versions that are available. And after you've installed them, you can actually see details as well, when it was published, all that. So it might be handy depending on your use case. Now, once you've got Flutter 2 installed, the next big question is, where do we begin? So I took a look at the 10 different repositories that we have, right? And this is purely, the structure is actually drawn out purely based on the pub/spec YAML files, which repository depends on which repository. So you see, pxweb, I realized that we actually decided not to use a modular structure. So all the dependencies are completely housed in pxweb on its own. It doesn't depend on another repository. So theoretically, pxweb can be something that we start doing a refactor to Flutter 2, but it's going to be really big. On the other hand, px mobile is done in a much more modular structure, but it's a little bit scary. So it's like, you see, it depends on px common depends on px firebase, but px mobile also depends directly on px firebase. But in any case, I've already structured them out into the 6 different layers. Ideally, we should tackle the pink layer first, and then slowly make our way up. One thing to take note of, it doesn't mean that doing things in a modular way like px mobile is better, or that in a non-modular way is better. There's actually pros and cons, and this is something that I will briefly highlight at the end of the sharing session later. So for the rest of this sharing session, right, I'm going to be drawing reference to the refactorings that I've tried out for px common. This one is a good example to share about, because there are repositories that depend on it, yes, and at the same time, it depends on another repository. So I think it will provide a pretty comprehensive coverage. So the very first step is to make sure that we get the latest dependencies. Now, when we migrate to Flutter 2, it's understandable that many different places in our code are going to change. And if you attempt to migrate to Flutter 2 without updating your pub dependencies, very likely you're going to run into a lot of problems, because these dependencies, if they're not compatible with Flutter 2, then yeah, you're going to have to upgrade them anyway. So we should take the chance to upgrade all of our dependencies. Definitely, there's going to be breaking changes. And the way that I approach this, and I recommend doing it this way, is starting from the, let's say, px common repository. Take a look at the YAML file. All these portions in orange, you just copy them into a new Flutter project. You paste them into the dependencies and dev dependency section respectively. Then for the other dependencies, basically any dependency that has got a version number tag to it, I created a convenience shell script. So just add this shell script to the root directory of the new Flutter project that you've created and paste them in here. And then just execute the shell script. So what the shell script will do is it will iterate through each dependency one by one and install the dependencies. So one thing to take note is that I think I encountered it, but I can't really recall, and I haven't actually tried it again. But there is a chance that you get different dependency versions being resolved in the pub/spec YAML file, depending on the sequence that you put the dependencies. Okay, so some human intervention might be required. For example, if let's say I put it in this sequence, provider gets installed first, and because there's no other dependencies, then definitely I will get the latest version of provider. But then next, you see, if I install connectivity and it's not compatible with the latest major version of provider, I'm going to run into a problem. So that's why if you change the sequence, or if you run into a problem, try changing the sequence of the packages in this shell script. So once this is done, oh, sorry, yeah, this is a slight deviation. So just in case, for those of you who have never tried out multi-line selection before, please spend some time to find out for your IDE and operating system, like what are the keyboard shortcuts or mouse shortcuts for doing multi-line selection. Because when you do this, especially if there's a lot of dependencies, you don't want to be copy-pasting line by line into the shell script. So, it's very fast if you just do multi-line selection like here. Okay, moving on. So once you have gotten the latest dependencies from the px common old pubspec YAML, which looks like this, now you have to you take whatever dependency versions that have been resolved in the new Flutter project that you created and just paste them over. One thing to take note of is that, one thing to take note of over here that I forgot to mention is that, you see, because px common depends on Firebase, px Firebase, so we need to make sure that px Firebase has already had a branch where refactoring to Flutter 2 has been done. Because when you depend on it, you want to make sure that you are referencing the correct branch. Okay, the reason why we also do this in a separate branch is so that until we are completely comfortable that refactoring has been done properly for all the repositories, we can actually keep it separately rather than pushing it to master and breaking everything. Okay, back here. So you see, this is just a sample for px common. A lot of repositories have changed. Look at the major versions, man. Get it? From 4, now we are 7. Block test from 4, now we are 8. One other thing to take note of is, okay, if your pubspec has got a Flutter node in the environment, right? Feel free to upgrade it to 2.2.2, given that this is now the Flutter version we intend to use. But for the SDK, theoretically, Flutter 2.2.2 is using SDK Dart version 2.12. But don't set it to 2.12, because if you do, then Flutter will expect that, when you run Flutter Analyze, it will expect that you intend to do null-safety fixes in your entire code base, which is a huge pain. I will share more about that in a later slide. So don't set it to 2.12 yet, just keep it at 2.11, okay? One more step would be, for some reason, somehow, even after you have fetched all the latest repositories, right? I don't know why some packages don't resolve to the latest one, like Darts. So you have to run this command to make sure that it's using the null-safe versions for the dependencies. Just one step, very simple, no issues. This is the least complicated step. Now, as I've shared just now, you see so many major versions for the dependencies changed. Once I updated px commons to the latest dependency versions, right, I get Flutter and Analyze actually throws 140 bugs. So some of them, I would say some of them are actually because of the transitive dependencies as well. For example, you see block test. In the earlier version that we were using, 4.0, it was actually relying on Mockito. But now, if you're looking at block test 8.0.2, now it's using another mock library called Mocktail. Similar kind of syntax, but behaves very differently. And from what I gather, Mocktail seems to be a lot more null-safe friendly as well. So that's something that we might want to consider, and I will be sharing a little bit more detail later on in one of the later slides as well about the issues with Mockito when you're talking about null safety. Other kinds of breaking changes. So a lot of breaking changes can be found in the merge requests that I've included. Over here, I just want to highlight like two of those that I think are interesting. So some of the breaking changes, right? Okay, wait. Most of the breaking changes are pretty straightforward to fix. It's more like, they rename the function or something. Like for Google Cloud Functions, it used to be called Cloud Functions. Now they have actually renamed it to Firebase Functions. So simply changing every cloud function to Firebase function actually resolves the problem. Most of the breaking changes are like that. Some of the breaking changes, though, like the camera package, are a bit more interesting. So in the past, the old camera package required that we say where we want to save the photo to. So we have to specify a path. And after that, it calls this function execute file, you pass in a path, it calls crop square, you pass in a path, and crop square reads the path, loads it into a file, a byte stream. Sorry, not but yeah, it's a byte stream, and effectively it's a unsigned integer 8 list. So now you see the new way, take picture no longer accepts a path. Instead, take picture will return you with an X file. And X file is a class that already has an unsigned integer list over here. So there's actually one thing to take note of when you start to refactor and do a migration to Flutter 2 is when there's breaking changes, try to spend a little bit more time going into them. There might actually be room for optimizing our code. To be honest, I don't know whether it would make it more efficiently run, but at the very least, I think there's room to clean it up so that readability can be improved. Okay, so I've also mentioned in the merge request that I feel we can actually, for a start, stop at this stage for the Flutter 2 migration. So effectively just 3 steps: update all the dependencies, fix all, make sure that all your dependencies are using the null-safe package versions. And then the final step is fixing all the breaking changes. And we can actually stop here already. But if you're feeling brave, we can go all the way. And I've tried actually doing that as well. So what happens when you go all the way? The final step is actually just to make sure everything is migrated to null-safe versions. So you see, when you migrate to Flutter 2, you can actually start using packages, dependencies in your pub spec, right? Dependencies that are already null-safe. But it doesn't mean that your code base has to be null-safe ready. This is optional. If you want to do it, and if you want to see the scale of how many problems you will face if you try to implement null-safety, you just go back to the pub spec, change the environment SDK version to 2.12. So now Flutter Analyze will throw every single non-null safe issue. And I actually get 2,500 issues. Yeah. So now change it back to 2.11 because Flutter Dart, more specifically, it's actually Dart. They have a Dart migrate tool. So this Dart migrate tool will try to make like intelligent guesses of how to refactor your code to make it null safe. Not the best. We'll see the issues that it brings about in a moment, but at least it's a start. So change it back to 2.11 so that Dart migrate can function. If you change it to 2.12 and you try to run Dart migrate, it will actually just ignore and assume that you have already migrated everything. So run Dart migrate, and it'll take a while. It'll analyze your code base. Then after that, the terminal will actually provide you with a URL, locally hosted web page that I've shown a screenshot over here with every single file that they have refactored. And you can see like every single change that they've made in the file. If you click on it, you will see the details over here, like why is it that they did what they did. And you can modify it over here. You can decide which files to exclude. Once you're happy with it, you can click apply migration. And then your code base will have the changes reflected in them. Now, so what I did for the trial is I actually just ran Dart migrate and I didn't change anything. I just straight away clicked apply migration, and I still ended up with 500 issues that had to be manually fixed. This one, I can't think of an easy way of going about it. And it really is like puke blood. Yeah. So, Dart migrate, I don't know. That's where I think we'll need more people to look at it and perhaps think of whether there's any better ways of going about it. One of the main problems that I had was actually with Mockito. So when we use Mockito, generally, if let's say we want to write some test that involves collection, and if it is not important what we pass into collection for this test, we just use Mockito's any, but any returns a null. And now that Flutter 2 is going to be using null-safety, they are not happy that you're going to give them null. So what do? This assertion, the exclamation mark, was added by .migrate. So I remove it. Now instead, I see another problem. Hey, null can't be assigned to string. So I thought, okay no problem. Let me just cast it to string, any as string. And then the problem goes away. But if you try to run this test case, it will fail. Yeah, at runtime it fails because it's always returning null. So how do we get around this? The Mockito official documents actually specify two different ways. One of them is to use an automated mock generator. I haven't actually tried this one. I don't know how easy it is to use. Another way is actually to manually override a mock class with the implementation such that it accepts it can be null. So this one, I don't know. I don't really like the idea of creating custom overrides for so many of the mocks that we intend to use throughout our code base. It sounds like having to create a lot of boilerplate just to get things to work. There's an alternative, which is mocktail, which just now we briefly saw that block test dependency actually has migrated to. So mocktail has very, very similar syntax to Mockito. And they also have things like any. The advantage is that their version of any actually helps to handle the null issues. So it sounds like it would be a lot more suitable if we want to do a migration to null-safety in our code base. But the thing is, when I tried using mocktail, there were other issues as well. Some stuff that I still failed to solve. Some of it I've actually documented details inside the merge request. Yeah, so this is something that needs a little bit more help to work on as well, because I haven't actually fully explored this part. So what next? I would say that apart from the breaking changes, right, and seeing whether there's room for optimizing the way that we structure our code because of these breaking changes, also do keep a lookout for libraries that have been deprecated. For example, there's this library that I think all of our repositories have, Pedantic. In fact, if you create using the Flutter create command line tool, you'll see that Pedantic actually gets imported as a dev dependency as well. So this is the one that we are using for analysis options, what kinds of things you want to do for linting. But now, if you go to the official, let me just get there. Go to the Pedantic page, you'll see that it's deprecated. So I'm not sure why when you type Flutter create using the latest Flutter SDK, they're still dumping it in. And they're saying that you should now use this new one called Flutter lints. So just have to keep a lookout whether or not there's alternate libraries for ones that have been deprecated. The next thing also is I'm hoping that we can actually get more developers to help out, try, even if you don't do hands-on trying, at the very least, you could help by reviewing the refactoring that fellow developers have done. Maybe you are more familiar with certain portions of the code base because you helped to create them in the past, help to catch the refactoring mistakes. Test cases also, it might be a bit tricky for somebody who didn't actually write them in the first place. And definitely help to think of better ways to approach the migration, because especially for the fourth and the fifth steps, if we want to make an attempt at migrating to null-safety, whatever I have tried to think of, I don't think that's a very elegant solution. If we put our heads together, we might be able to figure out a better way to approach migrating to null-safety that I didn't manage to think of. And definitely we have 10 repositories, so it's also something that we'll need to spread the load. across the different squads and developers. Yeah, personally, I feel that I wouldn't actually use the word load. Sorry, I would like to take that word back. So for me, actually, I felt that it was quite fun. It was a nice opportunity for me to familiarize myself with different parts of the code base as well. So I don't know, maybe if there's new developers, I think they will be interested to spend some time to focus on this as well and get familiar with the code base. Now, just some closing comments about PX Mobile and PX Web. So as we have seen in the diagram previously, right? PX Mobile has a much more modular structure. PX Web is just one big monorepo. The thing is, there's pros and cons. So if you're talking about implementing breaking changes and fixing them end-to-end, I would say that PX Web, given that it is non-modular, would be a lot easier to implement and to detect whether or not a breaking change exists. Because if everything exists in one repository, the setup and the implementation are in the same place. But then you imagine, if we're looking at PX Mobile, the setup, let's say for Firebase related things, are mainly going to be found in PX Firebase. You resolve the breaking changes there, but it doesn't mean that the places that implement PX Firebase, let's say in PX Common or PX Mobile, actually have fixed those breaking changes. It'll be a little bit more challenging to detect and something that we need to pay more attention to for PX Mobile. On the other hand, PX Mobile, because it is modular, it also means that if we want to do a migration to null-safety, definitely it will be easier because you don't have to do like the whole code base at one time. You see, unfortunately, you are not able to set the SDK version to 2.12 and sorry, no, you're not able to keep the SDK version below 2.12 and start doing the null-safe operations. Let me show you what I mean. Over here, this is 2.11. It's not supposed to be null-safe ready yet. So if over here I say that, okay, this is something that can be null, see, it doesn't recognize that this is a valid operation. You have to change the SDK version to 2.12 first. But the downside is, the moment you set it to 2.12, this whole repository must be converted to null-safe. So something like PX Mobile as compared to PX Web that's more modular, it will be easier to do a migration. Yep, and one final disclaimer. So even though I touched on PX Firebase and PX Common, I would say that this is mainly just for POC. It'll be good to just use it as reference, but I think when it comes time to doing it properly, we'll either need to scrutinize it more carefully, or maybe I would even want to do a quick review and redo of it again.